My name is Cassidy, 33 years old, and at Christmas dinner, I sat perfectly still as I listened to my parents gift my $500,000 condo to my sister's family without ever asking me. I simply clapped, smiled, and quietly sold the property before New Year's Eve vanishing into thin air. By the time they realized what I had done, I had 80 missed calls on my phone. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic family members who thought they could walk all over you. The crystal wine glasses clinked together, echoing through the massive dining room of my parents' suburban home. The air smelled of expensive prime rib and the heavy pine scent of the towering Christmas tree in the corner. I sat near the end of the mahogany table, quietly cutting my vegetables, fully accustomed to being the invisible middle child. My mother, Brenda, stood up at the head of the table. She tapped a silver spoon against her champagne flute, demanding the attention of the 20 extended family members gathered around us. "I have an incredibly special announcement to make on this beautiful holiday," Brenda said, her voice dripping with that manufactured sweetness she always used for an audience. "As you all know, our precious Brittany is expecting her third child this spring." A chorus of polite applause and admiring sighs rippled through the room. My younger sister Brittany, sitting directly across from me, rested a hand on her slightly rounded belly and offered a modest, glowing smile. Beside her sat her husband DeAndre, a tall, striking African-American man who always dressed in flashy designer suits that I knew for a fact were purchased on maxed-out credit cards. DeAndre leaned back in his chair, exuding the unearned confidence of a man who constantly referred to himself as a startup entrepreneur while actively avoiding actual employment. Brenda clasped her hands together, looking at Brittany with pure adoration before shifting her gaze down the table to me. Her smile turned tight, the warmth instantly draining from her eyes. "Thomas and I have been thinking a lot about family legacy and sacrifice," Brenda continued, gesturing to my father, who nodded solemnly beside her. "Brittany and DeAndre are outgrowing their cramped apartment. Meanwhile, Cassidy is sitting all alone in a massive 3-bedroom condo downtown. It simply does not make sense. So as a family, we have made an executive decision." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Cassidy has graciously agreed to vacate her condo," Brenda announced loudly to the entire room. "She is giving the space to Brittany and DeAndre so they can raise our grandchildren in a proper environment. After all, a single woman working on computers all day does not need all that square footage. It is the perfect Christmas gift from a big sister." The sheer audacity of the statement hit me like a physical blow. The dining room erupted in applause. Aunts and uncles I barely saw once a year beamed at me, raising their glasses in my direction, praising my incredible generosity. I stared at my mother, completely paralyzed by the ambush. I had agreed to absolutely nothing. I had not even been asked. DeAndre leaned across the table, flashing a wide, brilliant smile that did not reach his eyes. "We really appreciate this, Cass," he said smoothly. "That downtown address is exactly what I need for my new LLC registration. Having a proper home office in the city will finally allow me to host investor meetings. Plus, the building has a pool for the kids. It is perfect." Brittany reached over and gave my arm a condescending little squeeze. "Do not worry about finding a new place right away," she said softly, though loud enough for the relatives to hear. "Mom said you can move your things into the basement here. It is just until you find a husband, then you can buy a place of your own." I pulled my arm away from her touch. My heart hammered against my ribs, hot anger flooding my veins. I worked 50-hour weeks as a data privacy analyst to save the $80,000 down payment for that condo. I paid the exorbitant property taxes. I paid the monthly homeowners association fees. But my family had constructed an entirely different reality. "Cassidy, move your glass," Brenda snapped, suddenly dropping the sweet hostess act for a fraction of a second. "You are going to leave a water ring on my good silk tablecloth. Put it on the coaster." I slowly picked up my cheap glass of ice water, moving it exactly where she pointed. "You know," Brenda said, turning back to my Aunt Susan with a self-satisfied sigh, "it is a good thing I insisted on co-signing that mortgage 5 years ago. Cassidy's credit was fine, but my name secured her a much better interest rate. I told Thomas back then that putting my name on the deed meant it was a family investment. And now look how perfectly it works out for the grandchildren. We are just reallocating family resources to where they are needed most. The narrative was airtight, delivered with such absolute conviction that any stranger would think my mother had bought the house herself. They were using a 5-year-old signature, a technicality born out of my mother's demand for control, to literally steal my home out from under me. They had orchestrated this entire public spectacle to trap me. They knew that if I caused a scene, if I screamed or cried or defended my property rights right here at the Christmas table, I would be branded the selfish, unstable, jealous spinster sister who wanted to deny her pregnant sibling a home. Every eye in the room shifted back to me. The applause had died down, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence. They were waiting for the breakdown. Thomas crossed his arms, staring me down with a stern warning in his eyes, daring me to embarrass them in front of the extended family. DeAndre smirked, taking a slow sip of his expensive red wine, a bottle I knew my father had paid for. Brittany tilted her head, playing the innocent, hopeful mother-to-be. I looked at their smug faces. I thought about the grueling years I spent building my career, the late nights analyzing complex legal data frameworks, the meticulous attention to detail that my job required. My family saw a quiet, passive woman they could easily bully. They had no idea who they were actually dealing with. I did not scream. I did not cry. Instead, I carefully picked up my steak knife and fork. I sliced a perfect piece of meat, placed it in my mouth, and chewed deliberately. I picked up my napkin, dabbed the corners of my mouth, and let a warm, radiant smile spread across my face. "You are absolutely right, Mom," I said, my voice bright and perfectly steady. "The space is completely wasted on me. I will have the keys ready for you before New Year's Eve." The entire table fell dead silent. The heavy silence that followed my cheerful surrender lasted exactly 4 seconds before DeAndre shattered it with a booming, theatrical laugh. He pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping harshly against my parents' polished oak floor. He swaggered over to the hallway closet, retrieved something, and marched right back to my side of the table. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed a flattened, medium-sized cardboard moving box directly onto my dinner plate. The heavy cardboard slapped against the fine china, instantly soaking up the rich brown gravy from my prime rib. "I brought this for you, Cass," DeAndre said, his voice loud enough to ensure every aunt and uncle in the room heard him. "Figured we could get a head start on your new reality." He leaned over my shoulder, smelling strongly of a designer cologne I knew cost more than his monthly car payment. "Considering you paid your own way through college working those graveyard shifts and you barely spend money on anything. Fun packing shouldn't take more than an afternoon. You probably just have some oversized sweaters and your work laptop, right?" I stared at the greasy cardboard, resting on my ruined meal. The sheer audacity of his words washed over me, dragging up memories I had spent years burying. I remembered the bone-deep exhaustion of clocking out of the data center at 4 in the morning, only to attend a lecture at 8. I remembered eating instant oatmeal for weeks straight, while my parents cheerfully wrote a blank check for Brittany to spend a semester partying in Europe, a program she dropped out of 2 months later because the dorms were not up to her standards. DeAndre strutted back to his seat beside my sister, high-fiving my father along the way. Thomas beamed at him, his chest puffed out with absolute pride. "That is exactly the kind of proactive thinking I like to see," Thomas announced, raising his glass toward DeAndre. "It takes a real man to take charge of his family's living situation." DeAndre nodded solemnly, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. "I appreciate that, Tom. Honestly, this move is crucial for my new entrepreneurial venture. I am finalizing the paperwork for my new LLC, and I absolutely need that downtown address for my corporate registration. Investors simply do not take you seriously if your registered agent is located in the suburbs. I need that premium zip code to secure this next round of venture capital funding. We are poised to disrupt the entire local logistics market." He tossed out buzzwords like confetti, stringing together a nonsensical business plan that anyone with a basic understanding of economics would see right through. But my father ate it up. Thomas clapped his hands together, his face flushed with excitement. That is what I'm talking about, Thomas declared, completely ignoring the fact that I was the one who had actually purchased that premium zip code with my own hard-earned money. I always said I needed a son to talk real business with. You are stepping up, DeAndre. You are providing for Brittany and my grandchildren. That is what a real provider does. Typing numbers into a spreadsheet all day, like Cassidy, does not teach you real-world market strategy. You are out here building an empire. My mother. Brenda clapped her hands in delight, pivoting the conversation toward interior design. Oh, Brittany, we can start picking out paint colors for the condo tomorrow morning. I was thinking a soft, soothing sage green for the nursery. We can paint right over that dark, moody wainscoting Cassidy put up in the second bedroom. Brittany wrinkled her nose, looking across the table at me with a performative pout. Your taste is just so depressing, Cass. It is very single corporate woman. I need a space that feels like a real family lives there. Oh, and you are going to leave the smart home system and the stainless steel appliances right. You will not have room for a massive double-door fridge down in Mom and Dad's basement anyway. It just makes sense to leave it for us. They were systematically dismantling my entire life, claiming my property, claiming my custom renovations, and laying claim to the appliances I had spent months researching and saving for. They sat there sipping wine paid for by my father, celebrating a corporate empire that did not exist while treating the actual owner of the property like a discarded servant. The data privacy analyst inside me did not feel rage. She felt absolute chilling clarity. I viewed their entire conversation as a security breach, one that I was already steps ahead of mitigating. I reached down and picked up the gravy-soaked cardboard box from my plate. I wiped my hands on my linen napkin. My pulse was incredibly steady. I folded the cardboard neatly in half, pressing the crease down hard with my thumbs. I pushed my chair back and stood up smoothly, capturing the attention of the entire room once again. I looked directly into DeAndre's eyes, watching his smug smile falter just a fraction under my unwavering stare. Then I swept my gaze over my father, my mother, and my sister, taking in their entitled, expectant faces. Don't worry about my things, DeAndre, I said smoothly. I guarantee this condo will be completely empty for you. You won't even recognize the place. The tension in the dining room broke only when Brittany pushed her heavy wooden chair backward, the legs scraping loudly against the floorboards. She rested one hand dramatically on the small curve of her pregnant belly and used the other to reach across the table, grabbing me by the wrist. Her manicured nails dug sharply into my skin. Cass, why do you not come help me get the dessert plates sorted in the kitchen? Brittany said. It was framed as a request for the benefit of our extended family, but her grip was an absolute command. I gently pried her fingers off my wrist, stood up from my gravy-soaked plate, and followed her out of the dining room. The heavy oak door swung shut behind us, muting the booming sound of DeAndre loudly explaining his imaginary corporate strategies to my completely captivated father. The kitchen was bright and sterile, smelling of cinnamon and the heavy bleach my mother used to scrub the granite countertops. As soon as the door clicked shut, Brittany dropped the glowing maternal act. Her shoulders slumped and she leaned heavily against the kitchen island, crossing her arms over her chest. She looked me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. I know you put on a brave face out there in front of Aunt Susan and the others, Brittany said, lowering her voice into a hushed, conspiratorial whisper. And I just want to say I am really proud of you for not throwing one of your little tantrums. We all know how unstable you can get when Mom has to make the hard choices. I leaned against the opposite counter, crossing my ankles, watching my younger sister, with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a predictable lab rat. What hard choices would those be, Brittany? She let out a long, suffering sigh, shaking her head, as if dealing with a particularly slow child. Cass, let us be entirely honest with each other for once. You are 33 years old. You are completely alone. Living by yourself in a $500,000 condo right in the middle of the city is not just wasteful, it is actually embarrassing. People talk. Mom's friends talk. It screams desperate spinster. I tilted my head, offering a pleasant, vacant smile. Does it? Obviously, Brittany snapped, irritated by my lack of visible devastation. Men are intimidated by a woman who tries too hard to act like a man. You work those ridiculous hours staring at data screens, paying all those property taxes by yourself. It is unnatural. Mom and Dad are actually doing you a massive favor by making you leave. Moving back into their basement will give you a chance to finally hit reset. You can fix your life, figure out why you repel men, and maybe use the money you save on a gym membership and some decent highlights. The absolute precision of her cruelty was almost impressive. My family had always operated like a pack of wolves, instinctively knowing exactly where to bite to draw the most blood. 10 years ago, a speech like this from my golden child sister would have sent me running to the bathroom to cry until I threw up. I would have spent months internalizing her words, wondering what was fundamentally broken inside me that made me so thoroughly unlovable to my own flesh and blood. But I was no longer that desperate approval-seeking girl. Working in data privacy had taught me to view the world through a lens of cold, hard facts. Emotions were variables that could be manipulated. Contracts, legal deeds, and property rights were immutable constants. "You are so right, Brittany," I said, keeping my voice soft and dripping with manufactured gratitude. "I really appreciate your mercy. I have been feeling so overwhelmed with the upkeep of the place. The basement will be incredibly grounding for me." Brittany blinked, clearly taken aback by my total and absolute surrender. She had dragged me into the kitchen expecting a fight, preparing to play the victim the second I raised my voice. My compliance threw her completely off balance, but her deep-seated ego quickly overrode her confusion. "Well, good," Brittany huffed, recovering her haughty posture. "I am glad you are finally being mature about this. DeAndre and I are absolutely suffocating in our current apartment. With the third baby coming, we need premium space. We deserve premium space." She turned her back to me, opening the stainless steel refrigerator to pull out a massive whipped cream pie. As she arranged the dessert plates, she kept talking casually, dropping her next bombshell over her shoulder, as if discussing the weather. "Actually, that reminds me," Brittany said casually. "Mom and I were talking about the layout of the condo. You are going to need to leave the smart home hub and the security system active. Oh, and Mom already called an estate liquidator about your living room furniture." My heart did a slow, heavy thump against my ribs. My furniture. I had spent 2 years curating authentic, mid-century modern pieces, spending weekends at estate sales and investing nearly $15,000 into restoring a custom sectional sofa and a vintage dining set. "A liquidator?" I prompted, keeping my tone mild and inquisitive. "Yeah," Brittany said, grabbing a knife to slice the pie. "Mom said your stuff could easily fetch a few $1,000s from the right buyer. She is having the liquidator write the check directly to my baby registry fund. I absolutely need that self-rocking Bluetooth-enabled smart bassinet. Let us be real, your furniture is way too stiff and depressing for children anyway. We are going to buy a nice oversized plush sectional with the money." They were not just planning to steal the roof over my head, they were actively conspiring to liquidate my personal assets to fund their luxury lifestyle. My mother had already priced out my belongings and promised the profits to her golden child. The sheer, breathtaking entitlement solidified every single plan I had set into motion. It erased any lingering, microscopic shred of guilt I might have harbored about what was coming to them. "You are completely right," I said smoothly, stepping forward to hand her the dessert forks. "My couch is terribly bulky. I will make sure it is completely out of your way before you move in." Brittany smiled, snatching the forks from my hand. "Thanks, Cass. I knew you would eventually see logic." She turned away from me, leaning close to the dark-tinted glass of the double oven to check her reflection. She rubbed her front teeth, checking for lipstick smudges, completely captivated by her own image. While her back was turned, I slipped my phone out of the pocket of my slacks. The screen lit up with a silent push notification that had arrived 2 minutes ago. I opened my secure email client. The message was from Gavin, my real estate attorney. I tapped the screen, reading the single line of text that would act as the execution order for my family's delusions. The subject line stared back at me in bold black letters. "Quitclaim deed, sole ownership confirmed, ready to proceed." I slipped my phone back into my pocket before Brittany could turn around from her reflection in the oven glass. "The confirmation from my lawyer," was the final green light I needed. I had played the submissive, defeated sister long enough for one evening. I walked back into the dining room, grabbed my wool coat from the back of my chair, and quietly announced that I had an early morning system update for work and needed to head home. Brenda waved me off without even looking away from DeAndre, who was in the middle of describing how he planned to knock down my structural living room wall to create an open concept brainstorming space for his imaginary startup. I walked out the heavy front door and stepped into the freezing December air. The biting cold was a welcome relief from the suffocating heat of my parents' dining room. The gravel of the driveway crunched loudly beneath my boots as I made my way toward my car. I had my hand on the door handle when the front door of the house banged open. Heavy, hurried footsteps pounded down the concrete porch steps. "Cassidy, wait a second, my father," Thomas barked, marching across the frost-covered lawn. He did not wear a coat, clearly expecting this to be a quick dictatorial command rather than a conversation. I paused, my hand resting on the cold metal of my car door. I turned to face him, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "Listen to me carefully," Thomas said, pointing a thick finger at my face. "When you pack up your clothes and whatever cheap junk you have lying around, you are not to touch the appliances. Do you understand me?" I stared at him. The appliances he was referring to were a top-of-the-line smart refrigerator, a professional-grade induction oven, and a high-capacity washer and dryer set. I had purchased all of them with my own annual bonuses over the last 3 years. "DeAndre needs that kitchen fully equipped." Thomas continued, his breath pluming in the freezing air. "He is going to be hosting potential investors, and he cannot be dealing with a gutted kitchen. You have always been incredibly selfish with your things, Cassidy. I am warning you right now, do not try to load those appliances into a moving truck out of spite." I looked at the man who had raised me. He was standing in the freezing cold to secure a refrigerator for a son-in-law who had not held a steady job in 5 years. "I understand, Dad," I said smoothly. "I will not take a single appliance with me." He scoffed, clearly irritated that I was not fighting back. He needed a fight. He wanted the satisfaction of putting me in my place. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Do not give me that passive-aggressive tone," he growled, his face turning red. "You should be down on your knees thanking us for letting you move back into the basement. You are 33 years old and completely unmoored. You spend all your time playing on computers. That glorified secretary gig of yours typing numbers into a database is not a real career. DeAndre is building a legacy. He needs that property to establish his corporate footprint. You owe this family for putting up with your miserable attitude all these years. Do your duty for once in your life and do not ruin this for your sister." I did not argue. I did not defend my career as a senior data privacy analyst protecting multi-million-dollar corporate networks. I did not remind him that I made 3 times what he did before he retired. I simply nodded. "You are right," I said softly. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. I pulled the heavy door shut, grabbed the handle, and immediately hit the central locking button. The loud mechanical clunk echoed in the quiet driveway. Thomas stepped right up to the driver's side window. He tapped his knuckles aggressively against the glass, bending down so his face was inches from mine. He was still shouting, his mouth moving rapidly as he gestured toward the house, demanding my complete submission. I maintained direct eye contact with him. My hand moved to the door panel. Right in the middle of his furious, muffled sentence, I pressed the power window button. The glass slid up smoothly, sealing the cabin with a quiet thud and completely cutting off the sound of his voice. He stood there on the driveway, his mouth open in shock, staring at his reflection in the dark glass. I pushed the ignition button. The engine roared to life and the dashboard screen illuminated the dark cabin. The Bluetooth system chimed as it automatically synced with my phone. I ignored my father, who was now slapping his palm flat against my window in outrage. I pressed the voice command button on my steering wheel. "Call Zillow Cash Buyers," I said clearly. The system dialed. The phone rang twice over the car speakers before a crisp, professional voice answered the line. "Zillow Corporate Acquisitions. This is Marcus speaking. How can I help you tonight?" I shifted the car into reverse, my eyes locked on my father standing in the rearview mirror, bathed in the red glow of my taillights. "Marcus, "This is Cassidy Wilson," I said, pulling out of the driveway and leaving my father behind in the freezing cold. "I am ready. I will take the $480,000 cash offer. But you have to close the deal and legally transfer the title in exactly 4 days." The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown condo, casting long, sharp shadows across the original exposed brick walls. I sat perfectly still at my kitchen island, both hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee. The digital clock on the microwave read 7:15. The quiet peace of my Sunday morning was completely shattered by the harsh metallic scrape of a key sliding into the front deadbolt. The heavy door swung open, hitting the rubber wall stop with a loud thud. My father, Thomas, marched into the foyer, his heavy winter boots leaving wet, muddy tracks across the pristine hardwood floor I had polished just yesterday. Right behind him strolled DeAndre, holding a yellow tape measure and a thick plastic clipboard. He was wearing an expensive-looking cashmere turtleneck and dark designer jeans, looking like a man ready to direct a demolition crew. They did not knock. They did not announce themselves. They simply barged into my home, using the emergency spare key I had given my mother 2 years ago for ironically security purposes. "Morning, Cass," DeAndre announced brightly, ignoring me completely as he immediately walked toward the living room. He unclipped his tape measure and stretched it across the width of my custom-restored mid-century sofa. "Yeah, Tom, this entire seating area has to go. If I am going to host the initial coin offering for my crypto startup here, I need an open floor plan. We will tear out this kitchen island completely to make room for a catered networking bar." My father nodded in enthusiastic agreement, tracking more mud into the kitchen. I did not move. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, watching them treat my home like a construction site they had just purchased at auction. "Put the coffee down and go get your filing box," Cassidy Thomas ordered, snapping his fingers at me as if calling a disobedient dog. "Your mother was on the phone with her lawyer first thing this morning. If we just hand the condo over to DeAndre and Brittany, we are going to get hit with a massive luxury gift tax. The lawyer says we need to formally transfer the title under DeAndre's new LLC as a corporate restructuring asset." DeAndre let the tape measure snap back into its casing with a loud crack. He tapped his pen against the clipboard, offering me that same condescending smirk from the dinner table. "We need the original deed documents, Cass. Your mom said you keep all the paperwork in a fireproof safe in your bedroom closet. Just bring the whole box out here. We are heading straight to the notary in an hour to get your name scrubbed off the title so we can bypass the IRS fees. You used an emergency key to break into my home to demand my property deed," I stated, keeping my voice entirely flat and devoid of emotion. Thomas rolled his eyes, letting out a sharp breath of exasperation. "Stop being so dramatic. It is not breaking in when it is family property. Your mother is the primary co-signer on this mortgage. Her name is on the deed, which means my name is on the deed, which means we have every legal right to walk through that door whenever we please. Now stop stalling and go get the damn paperwork before I go into your room and find it myself." I set my coffee mug down on the granite countertop. The ceramic made a sharp, solid clink in the quiet kitchen. I looked at my father, then at DeAndre, who was busy writing notes on his clipboard, completely secure in his delusion that he was minutes away from owning $500,000 of prime real estate. "Mom's name is not on the deed," I said simply. Thomas stopped wiping his muddy boot on my rug. He looked up, his brow furrowing in irritation. "What are you talking about? I saw the paperwork 5 years ago. She co-signed the loan. Her name is on the title." I crossed my arms and leaned forward against the kitchen island. "You really should stop treating me like your unpaid personal accountant, Dad. Do you remember tax season 8 months ago? You and Mom dragged 3 shoe boxes full of unorganized receipts to my dining table because you were too cheap to pay a certified public accountant. You made me spend my entire weekend sorting through your messy deductions, categorizing your medical bills, and filing your state and federal returns for free. What does doing our taxes have to do with this condo?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising with impatience. "Because Mom has a fatal flaw," I explained, keeping my tone conversational and light. "She believes reading legal documents is beneath her. She thinks paperwork is for the hired help. When I handed her that massive stack of tax returns to sign, I had meticulously placed little yellow sticky notes, pointing to exactly where she needed to put her signature. Sign here, date here, initial here. She complained the entire time about her wrist hurting. She never read a single paragraph. She just flipped the pages and signed blindly wherever I told her to. DeAndre stopped writing on his clipboard. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his eyes narrowing. Right between the state tax return and your itemized deduction schedule, I had inserted a standard legally binding quitclaim deed. I continued enjoying the absolute silence that had suddenly fallen over the room. For the record, a quitclaim deed is a legal instrument used to transfer interest in real property. By signing it, Mom formally and legally relinquished any and all ownership stake she held in this condo, transferring her shares entirely to me. Thomas stared at me, his face slowly turning a dangerous, blotchy shade of purplish red. You are lying. You could not possibly do that. I took the notarized document straight to the county court the very next morning, I said, offering him a bright, cheerful smile. The clerk recorded it immediately. I have been the sole 100% legal owner of this property since last summer. You have no legal standing. Mom has no legal standing. And DeAndre's imaginary corporate LLC has absolutely no claim to my home. Thomas gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, his knuckles turning white. His mouth opened and closed as he struggled to find words, pure, unfiltered rage radiating from his entire body. He looked ready to lunge across the island and grab me by the throat. But I was not looking at my father. My eyes were fixed entirely on DeAndre. DeAndre had not moved a muscle, but the transformation in his posture was instantaneous and alarming. The smug, arrogant swagger completely evaporated. The expensive plastic clipboard slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill, a grayish, sickly pallor washing over his skin. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He reached out and grabbed Thomas by the sleeve of his winter coat, his grip desperate and tight. Tom, DeAndre rasped, his voice cracking completely. Tom, we need to go outside right now. Thomas yanked his arm away, still glaring at me with venomous hatred. What are you talking about? I am not going anywhere until this lying, deceitful— Tom, listen to me. DeAndre physically pulled my father backward toward the foyer, his voice dropping into a frantic, hyperventilating whisper. You do not understand. If Brenda's name is not on this house anymore, we have a massive problem. Tom, you need to listen to me right now. As DeAndre dragged my father toward the front door, he reached out to grab the brass doorknob. The morning sunlight caught his hand and I saw it clearly. DeAndre's fingers were shaking. It was not a small tremor of anger. His hands were shaking violently, rattling against the doorframe in absolute visceral terror. The terror did not last long. Within seconds, the panic in DeAndre's eyes mutated into a raw, explosive rage. He let go of my father's coat and spun back toward me. The carefully constructed facade of the wealthy, sophisticated startup founder completely shattered, leaving behind a desperate, cornered man. He lunged away from the door, stomping his muddy boots across the living room rug. You think you are so smart? He spat, his voice losing its polished corporate cadence entirely. He kicked his foot out, driving the heavy steel toe of his winter boot hard into the side of my restored mid-century coffee table. The vintage wood splintered with a sharp, sickening crack, and the table lurched across the rug, knocking over a stack of expensive design magazines. DeAndre Thomas barked, startled by the sudden violence. My father took a step forward, raising his hands, completely confused by his golden son-in-law's sudden loss of composure. DeAndre ignored him, stepping into my personal space, his chest heaving as he pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. Blood is thicker than legal paperwork, Cassidy. You hear me? You belong to this family, and this property belongs to this family. You are not going to pull any of your sneaky little technical stunts to steal what is rightfully mine. I need this title. Brittany needs this title. We have a baby on the way, and you are trying to leave us out on the street. I looked down at the fresh, jagged gouge in my vintage table, then back up at his sweating face. You cannot steal something you already own, DeAndre. And you certainly cannot evict someone who does not actually live here. He raised his arm violently, throwing his hand through the air as if preparing to strike the space between us. The sharp, jerky movement caused the inside pocket of his cashmere jacket to gape open. A folded piece of thick yellow paper slipped out, fluttering silently to the floor, landing right near the toe of my slipper. Neither of them noticed. DeAndre was too busy hyperventilating, and Thomas was too busy staring at the deed documents I had left sitting on the kitchen island. Without breaking eye contact with DeAndre, I shifted my weight. I casually moved my right foot forward, covering the yellow paper with the sole of my shoe, and sliding it backward, pushing it completely underneath the thick edge of the living room rug. "That is enough!" Thomas finally snapped, stepping between us and grabbing DeAndre by the shoulder. My father was furious, but his anger was momentarily redirected by DeAndre's erratic behavior. "We are not doing this right now. We are going to call Brenda's lawyer. If Cassidy tricked your mother into signing a legal document, we will have it voided for fraud. The court will tear her apart." Thomas began dragging DeAndre toward the open front door. "Get in the car. We are going to the office. We will handle this the right way." DeAndre resisted for a second, glaring at me over my father's shoulder. "You better not pack a single box, Cass. You are not going anywhere until my name is on that deed." "I will be right here," I replied, offering a polite, icy smile. Thomas pulled him out into the hallway, slamming the heavy front door shut behind them. The metallic echo of the deadbolt clicking into place signaled that they were finally gone. The silence rushed back into the condo, leaving only the smell of DeAndre's heavy cologne and the muddy footprints staining my floor. I did not immediately clean up the mess. I walked over to the edge of the living room rug, knelt down, and pulled out the folded yellow paper. The paper was heavy, slightly crumpled at the edges, and bore no official letterhead or corporate logo. It was a crude, aggressively typed document. I unfolded it, smoothing out the creases on the kitchen island. As a data privacy analyst, I was trained to spot anomalies, to trace digital footprints, and to uncover hidden liabilities. I did not need a background in financial forensics to understand exactly what I was looking at. The document was a final notice of default. It was not from a bank, it was not from a credit union or a legitimate venture capital firm. It was from an LLC I immediately recognized as a front for a notorious local hard money lending group, essentially high-end loan sharks who catered to desperate people with terrible credit. The principal loan amount listed was exactly $150,000. The borrower was listed as DeAndre's fake logistics startup. But what made my blood run cold was the section detailing the collateral. DeAndre had used the exact address of my downtown condo as the primary collateral to secure the illegal loan. Attached to the second page of the notice was a photocopy of a property pledge agreement. At the bottom of the agreement was my mother's signature. Brenda had supposedly authorized the use of her property to back his massive debt. I stared at the looping, messy signature. It was a decent forgery, but the slant of the letters was entirely wrong. DeAndre had forged my mother's signature to borrow $150,000 from dangerous people operating under the absolute assumption that my parents were going to force me out and hand him the deed to cover his tracks. He had spent the money, lost the money, and was now trapped. I read the bold red text at the bottom of the final notice. The lenders did not care about startups or business plans. They demanded the original legally recorded property deed transferred into their holding company's name. The final deadline to surrender the deed was January 1st. If the paperwork was not provided, they were coming to collect the debt directly from the borrower. I stared at the bold red text at the bottom of the final notice. The reality of the situation settled over me like a heavy winter chill. DeAndre had not just borrowed money from a reckless venture capital firm or a standard bank. He had gone to an underground hard money lender. These were loan sharks, hiding behind a corporate LLC, people who did not care about business plans, market projections, or legal excuses. They cared about collateral, and they cared about collecting their debts by any means necessary. DeAndre was desperate, and his desperation had just invited immense physical danger directly to my doorstep. He had pledged a property he did not own, using a forged signature from a mother-in-law who blindly adored him. If he did not surrender the actual legally recorded deed by January 1st, these lenders were going to come looking for him, and they would come to this exact address to do it. My first instinct, ingrained by a lifetime of playing the responsible sister, was to pick up the phone and warn my parents. I actually reached for the device before stopping myself. Warning them would be useless. Thomas would immediately blame me for not handing over the deed to save DeAndre. Brenda would demand I take out a second mortgage to pay off the loan sharks to protect her precious son-in-law. They would throw me to the wolves without a second thought if it meant shielding Brittany and her husband from the consequences of their own actions. I was not going to be collateral damage in DeAndre's fraudulent collapse. I dropped the notice into my paper shredder, listening to the sharp whine of the blades destroying the evidence. I needed to disappear, and I needed to do it today. I pulled out my phone and dialed a premium rapid dispatch moving company. They charged triple their standard rate for same-day emergency service, but I had the liquid cash and no time to spare. Next, I called a local estate liquidator I had met at an architectural salvage auction last year. I told him I had a condo full of pristine mid-century modern furniture, and he could have the entire lot for a flat cash rate if he brought a box truck within the hour. While I waited, my phone began vibrating violently against the granite countertop. It was a rapid-fire barrage of text messages from my mother. Cassidy Marie, you need to bring that deed to our lawyer right now. You have no right to do this to your sister. DeAndre is trying to build a legacy for his family. If you do not hand over those documents by noon, I am calling the police and having you arrested for theft of family property. I will not let you ruin Brittany's future out of petty jealousy. I read the messages with a detached clinical fascination. The absolute irony of Brenda threatening to have me arrested for theft, while a forged document bearing her fake signature sat in a loan shark's office, was staggering. She was threatening police action over a legal property transfer, while her golden son-in-law was committing actual felonies. I did not reply. I muted her contact, flipped the phone face down, and walked into my home office. As a senior data privacy analyst, my digital footprint was my most valuable asset. I systematically dismantled my primary workstation. I carefully packed my specialized data wiping hard drives into a shockproof, waterproof case. I had already initiated a secure military-grade remote wipe of my local network servers and the smart home hub. I cleared the router logs, wiped the thermostat memory, and scrubbed the digital access codes for the building's security gate. There would be no trace of my personal information, financial records, or new forwarding addresses left behind. The condo was becoming a digital ghost town. The liquidator arrived exactly 50 minutes later with a crew of 3 large men. He walked through the living room, his eyes lighting up at the custom sofa, the solid walnut dining set, and the designer light fixtures. He handed me a thick stack of crisp $100 bills. He even agreed to take the coffee table DeAndre had kicked, noting that his carpenter could easily buff out the dent. Immediately after the liquidator's truck pulled away, the rapid pack movers arrived. I directed them to take only my clothes, my filing boxes, and the secure hardware case. Everything else was left behind. Within 3 hours, my beautiful, carefully curated home had been stripped down to the bare, echoing floorboards. The moving crew hauled my boxes down to their truck, heading straight for a secure, anonymous storage facility I had rented under a corporate proxy months ago. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the condo was completely empty. The late afternoon sun stretched across the bare hardwood, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. My footsteps echoed loudly off the exposed brick walls as I walked through the vacant rooms. I stood alone in the center of the living room, holding nothing but a single manila folder containing the final closing documents. The heavy front door opened one last time. A man wearing a branded corporate polo shirt stepped inside, holding a thick plastic clipboard. It was Marcus, the acquisition inspector from the Zillow Cash Buying Division. He walked through the empty foyer, his work boots squeaking slightly on the clean floors. He did a swift, methodical walkthrough of the vacant rooms, checking the plumbing fixtures, verifying the electrical panel, and making a few quick notes on his clipboard. He did not ask about the lack of furniture or the rapid departure. His only concern was the structural integrity of the asset. Marcus walked back into the living room and stopped in front of me. He handed me the clipboard and a black pen, offering a bright professional smile. Everything looks good to go. We are sending our demolition crew in on the 31st to gut the interior for the flip. You are officially free and clear. I stepped out of the freight elevator and into the immaculate glass-walled reception area of Sterling and Vance, the corporate law firm representing the cash acquisition company. The environment was a jarring but welcome contrast to the vacant, echoing condo and the muddy, chaotic scene that had played out in my foyer just hours earlier. Here the air smelled of expensive leather and polished mahogany. There was no shouting, no mud on the rugs, and certainly no DeAndre kicking furniture in a frantic rage. A paralegal led me into a corner conference room overlooking the frozen city skyline. Mr. Sterling, a senior partner with silver hair and a meticulously tailored charcoal suit, sat at the head of a massive granite table. Before him lay a perfectly aligned stack of legal documents, each flagged with bright blue signature tabs. He stood and offered a polite, firm handshake before gesturing for me to take the leather ergonomic chair across from him. We moved through the initial paperwork efficiently. I signed tax disclosures, liability waivers, and the standard transfer affidavits. My hand moved smoothly across the thick parchment paper. Every stroke of the pen severed another tie to the family that had spent my entire adult life treating me like a disposable asset. Mr. Sterling paused as he slid the final heaviest stack of documents toward me. He rested his hands on the table, interlacing his fingers. He looked at me with a mixture of professional curiosity and genuine confusion. Miss Wilson, I am required to ensure my clients fully understand the scope of their transactions. He began, his tone measured and careful. My team ran the comps on your property this morning. The downtown market is highly competitive right now. You are selling this condo to our investment group for $480,000 in cash. According to our internal appraisal, you are leaving at least $120,000 of equity on the table by closing this fast. I have to ask why you are willing to take such a significant financial loss. I did not answer immediately. I picked up the heavy brass pen he had provided and rolled it between my fingers, feeling the cold, solid weight of it. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the gray winter clouds gathering over the city. I am not taking a loss, Mr. Sterling, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of regret. I am paying for peace of mind, and quite frankly, I consider it a bargain. He tilted his head, clearly waiting for an explanation. I normally kept my family history strictly compartmentalized, locked away behind professional boundaries. But sitting in this sterile room minutes away from total freedom, the truth demanded to be spoken aloud. 12 years ago, I explained, looking directly into the lawyer's eyes, I had a college fund. It was a joint account, heavily restricted, but my name was on it. I had spent my entire high school career working weekend shifts at a local diner, depositing every tip and paycheck into that specific account to ensure I would graduate without crushing debt. It contained just over $60,000 by the time I was accepted into my university program. Mr. Sterling nodded slowly, sensing where the narrative was heading. My older sister Brittany decided she wanted a destination wedding in Cabo San Lucas. I continued, my tone remaining dangerously calm. She wanted imported white orchids, a custom designer gown, an open bar with top-shelf liquor, and a firework display over the ocean. The man she was marrying was an aspiring club promoter who brought nothing to the table. My parents did not have the cash for Brittany's dream wedding, so my mother, who was the primary custodian on my college account, walked into a bank branch and completely drained it. She emptied every single cent I had earned. Mr. Sterling let out a sharp, quiet breath. He leaned back in his chair, appalled. I imagine you confronted them about this theft. I did, I said. My father told me I was being selfish. My mother told me that Brittany's wedding was an investment in the family's social standing. She promised they would pay me back eventually. They never did. I took out massive high-interest student loans. I worked night shifts as a data entry clerk while taking 18 credit hours a semester. I paid off my own debt while Brittany divorced the club promoter exactly 14 months after the fireworks faded over the beach. They stole my future to fund her vanity project, and they never apologized for it. I reached out and pulled the final stack of closing documents toward me. When I convinced my mother to sign that quitclaim deed last summer, I was not stealing her property. I was balancing a ledger that had been in the red for over a decade. I took back my principal investment, and I factored in 12 years of compound interest. Selling this condo to your firm at a slight discount means the transaction closes today, before my father can file a frivolous injunction, and before my brother-in-law's loan sharks show up to break down the door. I am leaving them the mess they created, and I am taking exactly what is mine." Mr. Sterling stared at me in profound silence for a long moment. He did not offer empty platitudes or fake sympathy. He simply nodded his head in absolute professional respect. He tapped the specific line at the bottom of the final page. "Sign right here, Miss Wilson," he instructed quietly. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my full legal name with a sharp, definitive flourish. The moment the pen lifted from the parchment, my phone vibrated violently inside my coat pocket. The screen lit up with an urgent, high-priority push notification from my encrypted banking application. I pulled the phone out and swiped the screen. Incoming wire transfer complete. Available balance, $480,000. I exhaled a long, shaking breath. The heavy, suffocating weight that had been sitting on my chest since I was 18 years old completely vanished. I was entirely liquid. I was untethered. I was a ghost. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I said, standing up and sliding my phone back into my pocket. He stood and shook my hand once more. "Safe travels, Miss Wilson. Enjoy your peace of mind." I walked out of the conference room and stepped into the quiet elevator. As the steel doors glided shut, sealing me inside the descending cabin, I pulled my phone back out. I opened my Premier Airline application and bypassed the standard domestic routes entirely. I typed in a destination I had only ever researched during late-night shifts at the data center, a place entirely disconnected from the cold, gray reality of my family. I selected a one-way first-class ticket to the Amalfi Coast in Italy. I paid the exorbitant last-minute booking fee without a second thought. The digital boarding pass generated on my screen in bright, glowing colors. Departure, 2:45 p.m. I checked the time. My flight was boarding in exactly 4 hours. I had my passport in my jacket, my data drive secured in my bag, and nearly $500,000 in the bank. Thomas, Brenda, and DeAndre were currently screaming at each other in a panic, desperately trying to figure out how to satisfy a violent debt with a property they no longer owned. I smiled, letting the gentle hum of the elevator carry me down to the street level. I was not just leaving the city, I was leaving their world entirely. The icy, biting wind of the city was nothing but a memory the moment I stepped off the plane. My first-class flight across the Atlantic had been a blur of heavy sleep and quiet luxury, a sharp departure from the suffocating anxiety that had defined my life for the past decade. A private car service met me at the airport in Naples, navigating the winding, perilous coastal roads with practiced ease. As the Mediterranean Sea expanded into view, a brilliant, endless stretch of sparkling sapphire, the knot in my stomach permanently unspooled. My new home was a stunning multi-level cliffside villa in Amalfi. It featured sun-baked terracotta floors, whitewashed stone walls, and a sprawling terrace that hung directly over the crashing waves below. The air smelled of lemon groves and salt water. The absolute profound silence of the property was a stark contrast to the shouting, the entitlement, and the constant demands that had echoed through my old life. There were no muddy boots tracking across my floors. There were no arrogant men kicking my furniture. There was only the gentle coastal breeze and the knowledge that I was entirely, completely free. I unpacked my single suitcase, hanging my clothes in a massive cedar closet. The minimalist approach to my new life felt incredibly grounding. I had left the physical baggage behind, taking only my secure hard drives, my passport, and the liquid capital I had rightfully reclaimed. I walked out onto the stone balcony, settling into a wrought iron chair. The afternoon sun warmed my skin. I reached for the bottle of crisp local white wine the villa manager had left on the table, pouring myself a generous glass. The chilled wine tasted like victory. I opened my laptop and connected to the secure satellite network I had routed through a proxy server. As a privacy analyst, I knew better than to leave any digital breadcrumbs, but I still maintained a ghost account to monitor the blast radius I had left behind. I took a slow sip of my wine and navigated to Brittany's public social media pages. My sister had always treated her online presence as a weapon curating a fake reality to make everyone else feel inadequate. Today was no different. Her feed was an absolute masterpiece of delusion. She had posted a frantic flurry of updates over the past 48 hours. There was a meticulously edited photo of her holding a packing box, wearing a full face of professional makeup and designer athleisure wear. The caption read, "Countdown to the big move. We are taking over the downtown penthouse. So blessed to have a husband who provides." I scrolled down. The next post was a digital mood board filled with pictures of mid-century modern furniture specifically mimicking the exact pieces I had sold to the liquidator for cash. She had tagged DeAndre's fake logistics startup, bragging about how the open concept living space was going to be the perfect venue for his investor launch party. She was completely oblivious. She had absolutely no idea that the luxury condo she was bragging about was completely empty, legally sold to a corporate conglomerate, and currently acting as the collateral for a six-figure debt held by violent criminals. She was boasting about a kingdom built entirely on quicksand. I leaned back in my chair, the warm Italian sun contrasting sharply with the cold, calculated reality of what was about to happen. I closed the social media tabs and checked the encrypted world clock application running on my desktop. The digital numbers shifted. It was currently mid-afternoon in Amalfi, which meant it was exactly December 31st, back in the United States. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the freezing city I had left behind. It was 8:55 in the morning. I opened my custom home security dashboard. When I dismantled my primary network at the condo, I had deliberately left a secondary, completely untraceable surveillance system active. I had installed micro cameras inside the ventilation grates in the foyer and discreetly mounted audio sensors behind the hallway light fixtures. The building management provided the raw internet connection to the common areas which I had hijacked to keep my feeds live. The application buffered for a few seconds before rendering a crystal-clear high-definition video feed of my former entryway. The condo was completely bare. The polished hardwood floors stretched out into the empty living room. There was no furniture, no warmth, no sign that anyone had ever lived there. The clock on my screen ticked forward. 8:58, 8:59, 9 o'clock exactly. I hit the bright red record button on my dashboard, capturing every frame of the video feed directly to my encrypted cloud storage. Today was the day the Zillow corporate acquisitions team was scheduled to send their heavy demolition crew to gut the interior for an aggressive flip. Today was also the day before DeAndre's illegal hard money loan defaulted, meaning the loan sharks would be aggressively looking to secure their collateral. And based on Brittany's frantic social media posts today, was the exact day my family planned to proudly march into the condo with their moving boxes to claim their stolen castle. I took another sip of my wine, my eyes locked on the laptop screen. I was thousands of miles away, sitting in paradise, waiting for the inevitable catastrophic collision. The high-definition feed from the hidden hallway camera flickered onto my laptop screen, rendering the harsh fluorescent lighting of my former building with crystal clarity. I adjusted my sunglasses against the brilliant Italian sun and leaned closer to the monitor. Down on the street level captured by the secondary camera, I had tucked inside the lobby planter, two massive bright orange U-Haul trucks lurched to a halt parking illegally across the loading zone. The passenger doors swung open. Out stepped the conquering royalty. Brittany emerged first swathed in a pristine white puffer coat that was entirely impractical for moving heavy furniture. She was holding her phone at arm's length, angled high to catch her best side. Even through the tiny audio receiver, her shrill, performative voice echoed perfectly. "Hey, everyone, welcome to the biggest moving day ever," Brittany chirped into her camera, waving her free hand. "We are officially taking over the downtown penthouse. I cannot wait to show you guys the custom layout we are planning for the nursery." My mother stepped into the frame right behind her, aggressively wedging herself into the live stream's view. Brenda had dressed up for the occasion wearing a tailored wool coat and her signature pearls looking entirely out of place next to a rented moving truck. "Make sure you tell your followers how this happened, Britt," Brenda announced loudly, her voice practically vibrating with self-satisfaction. I generously bought this place to ensure my grandchildren have the absolute best start in life. A mother's love means securing your family's future, no matter what it takes. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my chilled wine. Hearing Brenda claim she bought a property that she had legally signed away for $0 just to posture for strangers on the internet was a masterpiece of delusion. She genuinely believed she had orchestrated a brilliant real estate coup by forcing me out. Behind the two women, Thomas and DeAndre climbed out of the lead truck. Thomas looked miserable, rubbing his lower back and glaring at the heavy loading ramp. DeAndre, however, looked completely unhinged. The temperature back in the city was well below freezing, evidenced by the frost clinging to the lobby windows. Yet DeAndre was sweating profusely. He wiped a trembling hand across his forehead, his eyes darting frantically around the street. He aggressively shoved his left sleeve back to check his heavy designer watch. The loan sharks had given him until January 1st to surrender the physical legally recorded property deed. He had roughly 15 hours left to produce a document he did not possess. DeAndre did not care about the live stream. He did not care about the nursery or the mid-century furniture Brittany was currently describing to her followers. He was a cornered animal, desperate to get inside that condo, rip apart my files, and find the paperwork that would keep his kneecaps intact. "Let us get inside!" DeAndre barked, his voice cracking with panic. He grabbed a heavy duffel bag from the cab of the truck and marched toward the glass lobby doors, not waiting for his wife or his in-laws. I tracked their progress through the building using the overlapping camera feeds. They piled into the elevator, Brittany still narrating her grand entrance, Brenda preening for the lens, Thomas complaining about the parking situation, and DeAndre vibrating with restless, terrified energy. The elevator doors opened on my floor. I switched my primary view to the camera concealed directly outside my former front door. They marched down the hallway in a tight group. Brittany stepped up to the heavy wooden door, flipping her phone around to capture the grand unveiling. She reached for the brass handle with a triumphant smile. She pulled the handle. It did not budge. Did. "DeAndre, the digital lock is blank," Brittany whined, tapping her manicured nails against the dark keypad. "Cassidy must have turned off the smart hub." "Of course she did," Brenda scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "That spiteful girl probably took the batteries out just to be difficult. Use the backup key, DeAndre." DeAndre shoved past his wife, his breathing ragged and audible through the hidden microphone. "I do not have a key. She never gave us a physical key. She just changed the app permissions." He grabbed the heavy brass handle and rattled it violently. The deadbolt held firm. "Well, call the building manager," Thomas grumbled, leaning against the hallway wall. "Tell them we are the new owners and we need emergency access." "We do not have time for the building manager," DeAndre snapped, his voice reaching a fever pitch. He dropped his heavy duffel bag onto the carpeted floor with a loud thud. He unzipped the main compartment and dug his hands inside, shoving aside workout clothes and tangled charging cables. "DeAndre, what are you doing?" Brittany asked, lowering her phone slightly, her performative smile faltering. "People are watching the stream. Just call the front desk." DeAndre ignored her completely. He pulled his hand out of the duffel bag. His fingers were wrapped tightly around a heavy, solid steel crowbar. Brenda gasped, taking a sudden step backward. "DeAndre, put that away. What is wrong with you?" "I am getting us inside our property," DeAndre growled, his eyes wide and manic. He stepped up to the door, wedging the sharp, curved edge of the crowbar into the narrow gap between the heavy wooden door and the steel frame. He gritted his teeth, his muscles straining under his winter coat as he prepared to force the lock. I sat perfectly still on my Italian balcony. I did not touch my wine. I did not blink. The tension radiating through my laptop screen was electric. DeAndre adjusted his grip, pulling his arm back to deliver a shattering blow to the locking mechanism. Just as he threw his entire body weight forward before the steel could strike the brass, a loud metallic click echoed through the hallway. The deadbolt retracted. DeAndre stumbled forward, his momentum suddenly useless. The heavy wooden door slowly swung open from the inside. A thick cloud of white gypsum dust billowed out into the pristine hallway, momentarily obscuring the camera lens. As the haze settled, the figures in the doorway came into sharp, undeniable focus. 3 massive men stepped out of the unit. They were covered from head to toe in fine drywall powder, their heavy steel-toed work boots leaving thick white footprints across the hallway carpet. Each of them gripped a heavy, long-handled sledgehammer. The foreman, a broad-shouldered man with thick forearms and a heavy canvas work vest, stepped directly into DeAndre's path. He looked down at the iron crowbar clutched in DeAndre's trembling hand, then locked eyes with him. "What the hell do you think you are doing to my company's property?" The foreman barked, his voice echoing loudly down the corridor. I smiled, leaning back in my wrought iron chair on the Amalfi balcony. The Mediterranean breeze ruffled my hair as I turned up the volume on my laptop. The live feed was broadcasting perfectly. Brittany stood completely frozen, her arms still extended high in the air to broadcast her grand entrance to her followers began to shake. The reality of the dirty, intimidating construction crew standing in her supposed luxury penthouse short-circuited her brain. Her fingers went limp. The expensive smartphone slipped from her grasp and clattered hard against the hardwood floor. It landed face up, the camera lens now broadcasting a static view of the hallway ceiling. The microphone, however, continued to capture every single word of their humiliation, streaming the meltdown live to her entire audience. "This is my house," Brittany screamed, her voice shrill and echoing with absolute panic. "Get out of my house!" The foreman let out a deep, booming laugh that reverberated through the corridor. He did not step back. Instead, he shifted his weight, leaned on the handle of his sledgehammer, and pointed a thick, calloused finger over his shoulder. "Your house," he mocked. "Take a good look, lady." Through the open doorway, the family finally saw the interior. The security camera caught the reflection of their horrified faces as they stared into the abyss. The beautiful, pristine condo I had meticulously maintained for years no longer existed. The rapid demolition crew had been working continuously since yesterday afternoon. They had completely gutted the unit down to the structural framework. The custom walnut kitchen cabinets were gone, replaced by a massive pile of shattered drywall and splintered lumber. There were no interior walls separating the rooms, no luxury lighting fixtures, and no designer flooring. There was nothing but bare wooden studs hanging electrical wires and exposed copper pipes. It was a raw industrial construction zone. DeAndre dropped the crowbar. The heavy iron tool hit the floor with a loud metallic clang. He stumbled backward, his hands gripping his head. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving violently under his expensive winter coat. The sweat pouring down his face had nothing to do with the physical exertion of the move. He was doing the brutal, terrifying math in his head. The underground loan sharks did not just want a piece of paper. They wanted a tangible asset they could liquidate to cover his $150,000 debt. A completely gutted, unlivable shell of a condo was useless to them. His collateral had literally been smashed to pieces. He was a dead man walking, and his deadline expired tomorrow. Brenda pushed her way past Thomas, her face flushed with a mixture of rage and utter disbelief. She pointed a trembling finger at the foreman, attempting to assert the authority she used to bully me. "What have you done to my property?" Brenda demanded, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "I generously bought this place to ensure my grandchildren have the absolute best start in life. I secured this home for my family. You have destroyed a luxury asset." The foreman stared at her, completely unfazed by her suburban entitlement. "Lady, I do not know what kind of scam you think you are running, but nobody lives here. My crew was hired to execute a total teardown for a corporate flip. We are tearing out the plumbing next." "You have no right," Brenda shrieked, stomping her foot. "Cassidy was supposed to leave the keys. She transferred this property to me." I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the crisp flavor, as I watched Brenda publicly confess her delusional entitlement. She genuinely believed that her forged signature and emotional manipulation had cemented her ownership. She could not comprehend that I had outmaneuvered her, liquidating the asset legally and leaving her holding a worthless, fraudulent claim. Thomas stepped forward physically, placing himself between Brenda and the foreman. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project the intimidation tactics he had always used to force my compliance. "I do not know who hired you, but you have made a massive legal error," Thomas stated, his voice dripping with condescension. You have illegally broken into and destroyed private property. I am calling the police right now. I am having you and your entire crew arrested for trespassing and felony vandalism." The foreman did not blink. He did not retreat a single inch. He casually rested his sledgehammer against the doorframe and turned toward a heavy metal lockbox sitting on a rolling utility cart just inside the unit. He popped the metal latch and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila folder. He turned back to Thomas, his expression hardening into a terrifying scowl. He reached into the folder and pulled out a single crisp document. The heavy parchment paper featured a bright blue raised seal. It was the freshly stamped county-certified property deed officially recording the transfer of the condo from my name to the corporate acquisition firm. The foreman shoved the certified deed directly toward Thomas's chest, forcing my father to take it or let it fall to the floor. "Call them," the foreman growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous gravelly timbre. "Let us see what they say about this." Thomas stood frozen in the hallway, the heavy parchment paper hovering just inches from his chest. He was entirely too stunned to process the raised blue seal or the bold legal print. DeAndre, however, possessed the frantic, erratic energy of a drowning man. He shoved his father-in-law aside, his heavy winter coat rustling loudly against the corridor walls, and snatched the document directly from the foreman's calloused grip. DeAndre held the paper up to the harsh fluorescent lighting. His eyes darted across the text, tracking the official county recording stamps, the transfer dates, and the final purchasing entity. I watched the live feed on my laptop screen, sitting thousands of miles away, as every last ounce of corporate arrogance drained completely out of his body. His knees actually buckled. He staggered backward, his shoulders hitting the metal doorframe with a dull, heavy thud. The foreman crossed his massive arms over his canvas vest, clearly enjoying the spectacle. He did not care about their petty family drama, but he clearly did not appreciate arrogant men in designer coats threatening his active work site with a crowbar. He broke the tense silence, his voice booming down the dusty corridor. "The previous owner, Miss Cassidy Wilson, sold this property to our corporate acquisition group 4 days ago." He stated, his tone flat and unyielding. "It was a clean, expedited cash transaction. We own the walls, the floors, and the air inside. It is completely legal, and you are currently trespassing on a hazardous demolition site." Brenda let out a sharp, high-pitched gasp. She pushed her way past Brittany, practically vibrating with indignation. She refused to accept a reality where she was not the one holding all the cards. "That is impossible!" my mother shrieked, her face turning an angry, mottled red. "That is absolutely illegal. My name is on the original mortgage. I am a co-signer. Cassidy cannot sell a property that belongs to me without my explicit notarized permission. I will have you all arrested for real estate fraud. I will call the police this second." The foreman did not even blink at her shrill threats. He reached out, grabbed the top corner of the document still trembling in DeAndre's hand, and flipped it over. "Then you might want to check page 2. "Lady," the foreman said dryly, tapping a thick white dust-covered finger against the attached legal history printed on the back. "The chain of title is right there in black and white. A Brenda Wilson signed a quitclaim deed, terminating all financial and legal rights to this specific address back in May. The county recorder approved it and stamped it. You do not own a single square inch of this concrete." I leaned forward in my chair on the Amalfi balcony, watching Brenda's reality completely shatter. The highly sensitive audio feed picked up her sharp intake of breath. She stared at the back of the deed, her eyes locking onto her own looping signature from last summer. The memory was surely hitting her right then. She had happily signed that specific document under the absolute delusion that she was transferring the condo into a protective family trust to shield it from my non-existent creditors. I had carefully planted that lie so she would surrender her leverage without a fight. She had signed away her control to secure the property for Brittany, entirely unaware she was handing me the keys to my own financial freedom. Brenda began to hyperventilate. Her hands flew to her chest, clutching her pearl necklace as she struggled to draw air into her lungs. Thomas rushed to steady her, his face pale and bewildered. He looked from the gutted, destroyed interior of the condo to the official county stamp on the deed, realizing simultaneously that his golden child had no home and his ultimate control over my life had permanently evaporated. But it was DeAndre's reaction that truly captivated me. He did not yell at the foreman. He did not throw a tantrum. He did not threaten to call his high-priced corporate lawyers or curse my name to the heavens. He simply dropped the paper. The heavy parchment drifted slowly to the floor, landing in a pile of white drywall dust. DeAndre looked up, staring blankly into the dark, gutted cavern of the condo. He was not looking at the missing kitchen cabinets or the exposed copper pipes. He was looking at his own impending doom. The collateral he had pledged to violent, unforgiving men was gone. It did not exist. The underground hard money lenders were expecting an original deed by tomorrow morning, and all he had was a completely empty, legally sold construction zone. Pure, unadulterated terror washed over his face. He knew exactly what those men would do to him when they realized he had scammed them out of $150,000. Without a single word, DeAndre spun around. He shoved past Thomas, nearly knocking Brenda to the floor in his haste to escape. "DeAndre, where are you going?" Brittany cried out, her voice shrill and demanding. She dropped her phone completely, no longer caring about the live stream broadcasting the ceiling to her followers. "We have 2 massive trucks full of expensive furniture downstairs. You need to fix this right now. You need to call your investors." He ignored his pregnant wife entirely. He broke into a dead sprint down the hallway, his heavy boots pounding against the carpet. He reached the elevator bank and frantically mashed the call button, his hands shaking so violently he missed the plastic circle twice. He began frantically patting down his coat pockets, tearing through the fabric, desperately searching for his phone. He needed to run. He needed to disappear before the lenders realized what had happened and sent their collectors to find him. I sat back in my chair, the warm Mediterranean breeze washing over my face. The chaos unfolding thousands of miles away played out silently on my high-definition screen, a perfect orchestrated symphony of consequences. They had tried to take everything from me, and in the end they had destroyed themselves. I picked up my wine glass from the small stone table. I held it up toward the laptop screen in a silent, solitary toast to the family I had finally left behind. Then, with a slow, genuine smile, I took a long sip of the crisp Italian wine. The heavy, satisfying silence of the Italian coastline was suddenly broken by a harsh, mechanical vibration. Sitting next to my laptop on the wrought iron table, my encrypted mobile phone began to buzz. It vibrated so violently against the stone surface that it nearly rattled right off the edge. I did not reach for it immediately. I simply watched the screen of my laptop. On the silent video feed, my mother was still staring at the back of the property, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, as the reality of her own signature mocked her. Thomas was pointing his finger at the demolition foreman, clearly shouting legal threats that meant absolutely nothing, while the foreman casually crossed his massive arms and laughed in his face. My phone stopped buzzing for a fraction of a second, only to immediately start up again. The digital onslaught had officially begun. I picked up the device and tapped the screen. The glass illuminated, displaying a chaotic waterfall of notifications. The numbers ticked upward with relentless, almost comical speed. 10 missed calls, 20 missed calls. Within the span of 4 minutes, the counter hit 50. By the time I unlocked the device, the screen glared back at me with 80 missed calls. They were bypassing my old blocked number and hitting the emergency proxy line I had deliberately left buried deep in the family group chat settings. I opened the messaging application and watched the panic unfold in real time. Thomas was typing in rapid-fire succession, his messages a jumbled mess of misspellings and baseless legal jargon. He accused me of grand larceny, embezzlement, and real estate fraud. He demanded I immediately reverse the transaction, or he would call the district attorney. It was a pathetic display of a man who realized his absolute control had just evaporated into thin air. He had no power here. The corporate acquisition firm held the deed, and the money was already routed through 3 different offshore accounts. Brenda bypassed the group chat, entirely flooding my direct messages with a barrage of capitalized words. She demanded I wire the proceeds of the sale into her personal checking account this very second. She called me a traitor, a thief, and an ungrateful daughter. She claimed the money legally belonged to her because she had birthed me. Even faced with a gutted, dust-covered construction site and a foreman holding a certified deed, her narcissistic delusion remained entirely intact. She genuinely believed she could simply order me to hand over a multi-million-dollar fortune. Then a new message popped up overriding the others. It was from Brittany. I opened the text, visualizing my sister standing in that freezing, destroyed hallway, her pristine white coat covered in drywall dust. The message read, "Mom is having a panic attack in the hallway. How could you do this to my babies? We have nowhere to live." I stared at the glowing text on my screen. The warm Mediterranean sun beat down on my shoulders, a stark contrast to the cold, suffocating anxiety those words used to trigger in me. For over a decade, a message like that would have sent me into a blind panic. I would have dropped everything, drained my savings, sacrificed my own peace, and begged for their forgiveness, just to stop my mother's theatrics and appease my sister's demands. I would have set myself on fire just to keep them warm. I looked at the message for one final second. With a single deliberate swipe of my thumb, I cleared the notification, dismissing it into the digital void. I took a slow, deep breath of the salty ocean air and reached for my wine glass. Suddenly, a new notification pinged different from the text alerts. It was a voicemail indicator. DeAndre had abandoned the text thread entirely and called my direct line, leaving an audio message. I set my wine glass down and routed the phone's audio output directly through my laptop speakers. I wanted to watch the street-level security camera feed while I listened. I clicked play. The audio file opened with the sound of a heavy vehicle door slamming shut, followed by the frantic jingling of keys and the unmistakable sound of a heavy lock engaging. DeAndre was inside the cab of the moving truck. His breathing was ragged, harsh, and echoing loudly through the small space. He was hyperventilating. "Cassidy, pick up the phone!" DeAndre screamed into the receiver. The smooth, arrogant drawl he always used to belittle me was completely gone. His voice was cracked, high-pitched, and dripping with raw, unadulterated terror. "You sold the house. You sold the collateral. What am I supposed to give the lenders?" He let out a strangled, desperate sob. I could hear his fist pounding against the steering wheel of the U-Haul. "You do not understand what you have done. These are not bank executives, Cassidy. These are violent men. They gave me until tomorrow to surrender the deed. I put that address on the loan documents. I promised them a luxury asset." On my laptop screen, the street-level camera showed DeAndre sitting in the driver's seat of the orange truck. He was physically shaking his head, whipping frantically from side to side as he scanned the busy downtown traffic. "They have my location." DeAndre wheezed into the voicemail, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper as if someone might overhear him. "The GPS tracker on my phone, they insisted on installing it before they handed over the cash. They know I am downtown. They know exactly where I am." A sharp metallic scraping sound echoed over the audio feed as DeAndre fumbled with the ignition. The truck engine sputtered but failed to catch. "They are coming to the condo right now!" DeAndre screamed, his voice breaking into a hysterical cry. "Cassidy, you have to wire me the cash. You have to save me. They are going to kill me." The voicemail abruptly cut off, replaced by the sterile automated beep of the messaging system. I kept my eyes locked on the street-level video feed. DeAndre was desperately twisting the ignition key, trying to start the heavy rental truck to make his escape. He was ignoring his pregnant wife, his in-laws, and the entire disaster unfolding upstairs. His only instinct was survival, but his timing was tragically flawed. Before the truck engine could turn over, two sleek, heavily tinted black SUVs rounded the corner at high speed. They did not brake for the loading zone. They aggressively jumped the curb, their heavy tires grinding against the concrete. The lead SUV slammed directly to a halt inches from the U-Haul's front bumper, completely blocking DeAndre's exit. The second SUV boxed the truck in from the side, pinning the driver's door against a concrete planter. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the wrought iron table, a slow smile spreading across my face. I reached for my wine glass, taking a long, satisfying sip, as the heavy doors of the black SUVs began to swing open. The heavy doors of the black SUVs swung open with a synchronized, ominous weight. The men inside did not rush. They moved with the terrifying, deliberate slowness of predators who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. 4 figures emerged onto the icy asphalt bundled in dark wool coats that did nothing to hide their broad, imposing frames. They did not shout. They did not brandish weapons. They simply formed a loose, inescapable semicircle around the front of the U-Haul, their cold eyes fixed entirely on the driver's side door. DeAndre scrambled out of the cab, his boots slipping on a patch of frost. He crashed hard against the side of the truck, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and unblinking. He was physically trapped between the solid steel of the moving truck and the approaching collectors. Brenda, Thomas, and Brittany poured out of the building's glass lobby doors, their voices creating a chaotic cacophony of outrage and confusion. They marched down the sidewalk completely oblivious to the silent threat closing in on DeAndre. They only saw the blocked truck and the ruined moving day. I sat back on my sun-drenched terrace in Amalfi, the Mediterranean breeze gently rustling the leaves of a nearby lemon tree. The stage was perfectly set. The actors were all precisely where I needed them to be. I picked up my encrypted phone, navigated to the family group chat that had been blowing up my secondary line for the past 20 minutes, and hit the video call icon. I wanted a front row seat to the main event. The phone rang only once before DeAndre answered. Pure blind reflex drove his thumb to the screen. He needed a lifeline, a distraction, anything to pull focus from the men closing in on him. His face filled my screen in high definition. He was practically green. Sweat poured down his temples, freezing almost instantly in the bitter wind. His hands were shaking so violently that the camera feed bounced and blurred. Cassidy! He choked out a wet, desperate sound. Before he could form another word, Brittany shoved her way into the frame, her face contorted with entitled fury. Brenda and Thomas crowded in right behind her, peering over DeAndre's shoulders in the freezing parking lot. They formed a tight, angry cluster around the small screen. You little thief! Brenda shrieked, her voice shrill enough to distort my phone's speaker. I am calling my lawyers right now. I am suing you for every single penny you possess. You illegally sold my property. You forged documents behind my back. You destroyed my grandchildren's future. You are going to federal prison. I let her scream. I let the silence stretch out after her tirade echoed down the cold city street. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, adjusting the angle of my phone so they could clearly see the bright blue sky and the sparkling Italian coastline behind me. I sold what was legally mine, I stated, my voice cold hard and cutting through the ambient noise of the traffic. Every document was legitimate, county recorded and finalized. You have absolutely no legal standing, Brenda. You never did. Thomas opened his mouth, his face purple with rage, preparing to launch into his own blustering legal threats. I did not give him the chance. But we have a bigger problem, do we not, DeAndre? I asked, my tone shifting from cold dismissal to calculated menace. I locked my eyes onto his terrified face on the screen. Why do you not tell my father why you are sweating so much in 20-degree weather? The promptness of this question derailed the family's anger. Thomas frowned, finally looking closely at his son-in-law. Brittany blinked, her performative outrage faltering as she turned her head. She saw the sheer, unadulterated panic radiating from her husband. She followed his darting gaze and finally noticed the 4 large, silent men standing in a semicircle around the truck. DeAndre, what is she talking about? Brittany demanded, her voice wavering with sudden uncertainty. Just hang up on her. Call the police on those men blocking the truck right now. DeAndre's trembling thumb hovered over the red-end call button. He was suffocating under the weight of his own lies. He wanted to kill the feed, to sever the connection, to delay the inevitable collision between his 2 lives for just a few more seconds. I would not do that if I were you, I warned smoothly. I reached down to my wrought iron table and picked up a thick, stapled document. I held it directly up to my webcam, ensuring the bright Mediterranean sun illuminated the bold, aggressive terms printed clearly on the first page. It was the physical copy of the hard money loan agreement I had found hidden under the area rug in his old, squalid apartment months ago. DeAndre's eyes locked onto the paper on the screen. He stopped breathing entirely. He did not just want a place to live, Brittany, I said, pitching my voice so every single member of my family could hear the absolute truth. He used Mom's forged signature to borrow $150,000 against a house he did not own. and he borrowed it from men who break legs for a living. I watched Brittany's jaw drop. I watched Thomas freeze, the color draining from his face as he looked from the screen to the four imposing men waiting patiently on the asphalt. And I watched Brenda finally truly realize that her precious golden child had married a man who had just served them all on a silver platter to a violent criminal syndicate. I smiled, lowered the document, and took a long, satisfying sip of my wine. The silence over the FaceTime connection lasted only a fraction of a second before the entire parking lot erupted into absolute chaos. The camera feed captured the exact moment the facade shattered. Thomas, a man who had spent his entire adult life projecting the image of a refined, untouchable patriarch, completely lost his mind. He lunged forward with a primal roar, crossing the icy asphalt in two massive strides. He grabbed the heavy, fur-lined lapels of DeAndre's designer winter coat in both fists. The sheer force of the older man's sudden fury propelled them both backward. DeAndre hit the corrugated orange metal side of the U-Haul truck with a sickening hollow boom that reverberated loudly through my laptop speakers. Thomas pinned him there, shaking him violently, his face inches from his son-in-law's terrified expression. The four men in black coats did not flinch or intervene. They simply took one collective step back, crossing their arms and watching the spectacle with dead, impassive eyes. They were giving the family room to destroy themselves, while ensuring every possible physical escape route remained entirely blocked. Brittany stood frozen for a single heartbeat, her hands clutching her pregnant belly, her pristine white coat looking ridiculous against the grimy backdrop of the loading dock. Then she started screaming. It was not her usual demanding, entitled screech. It was the raw, guttural sound of a woman watching her meticulously curated reality burn completely to the ground. She shrieked at the top of her lungs, stepping toward the truck. She demanded to know if it was true. She demanded to know if her perfect husband had actually leveraged her mother's home to criminal loan sharks. She screamed for him to look at her and deny it. But cornered animals are incredibly dangerous, and DeAndre had absolutely nowhere left to run. The panic in his eyes instantly hardened into pure venomous rage. With a sudden explosive burst of adrenaline, DeAndre violently shoved his father-in-law. It was a brutal two-handed thrust directly to the center of Thomas's chest. Thomas gasped, stumbling backward out of control. His expensive dress shoes slipped on the icy pavement, and he nearly toppled backward into a filthy gray snowbank before awkwardly regaining his balance. DeAndre stood panting against the truck, his pristine coat rumpled, his eyes wild and unhinged. He did not look at Thomas. He pointed a trembling accusatory finger directly at his weeping wife. He exploded, unleashing a torrent of ugly truths that had been festering beneath their picture-perfect marriage. He screamed that the brilliant tech startup she constantly bragged about online was a complete ghost. There was no company. There were no venture capitalists. He revealed that he had lost the entirety of his initial seed money at the casino blackjack tables over 12 months ago. The high roller's room had drained him completely dry while she was busy bragging to her friends about his entrepreneurial genius. Brittany shook her head, tears streaming down her face, begging him to stop talking, but DeAndre was too far gone. He took a step toward her, his voice echoing fiercely off the brick walls of the apartment building. He blamed her for every single debt. He screamed about her endless, insatiable vanity. He listed the luxury vacations, the designer handbags she bought to impress women she secretly hated, and the custom-imported $10,000 nursery furniture she had demanded just last week. He told her she had bled him dry, forcing him to maintain an illusion of extreme wealth that they simply did not possess. He roared that her relentless demands to keep up appearances for her social media followers gave him absolutely no choice. Traditional banks had cut him off months ago. He had to seek out men who do not ask for credit scores or verify income, men who demand flesh and blood as collateral when the payments stop. Brenda could not stomach the public humiliation for 1 second longer. Her precious son-in-law was a fraud, screaming about their financial ruin in a dirty parking lot in front of dangerous criminals. Her face was a mask of aristocratic fury. She marched forward, her heavy pearl necklace bouncing against her chest, her hand raised high in the air. She aimed a vicious, open-handed slap directly at DeAndre's face, intending to strike him into submission the same way she had always disciplined me. But DeAndre was no longer playing the role of the respectful, affluent son-in-law. His reflexes were fueled by pure survival instinct. His hand shot up with terrifying speed. His fingers wrapped around Brenda's wrist in midair, catching her strike before it could land. His grip was like a vice. He squeezed her delicate wrist so hard that Brenda let out a sharp, genuine gasp of pain, her knees buckling slightly under the pressure. DeAndre did not let go. Instead, he pulled her closer, leaning down into her face. And then he began to laugh. It was a manic, breathless sound. It was the dark, unhinged laughter of a man who knew he was going to drown and had decided to drag everyone else down into the freezing water with him. He stared directly into Brenda's wide, shocked eyes. His voice dropped to a cold, mocking whisper that carried perfectly over the FaceTime audio feed. "Do not act high and mighty with me, Brenda." He sneered, his lips curling into a vicious smile. "You are the one who gave me the idea." The entire family froze. The air in the parking lot seemed to solidify. Thomas stopped breathing. Brittany stopped sobbing. Even Brenda stopped struggling against his grip, her eyes widening in absolute paralyzing horror. DeAndre dropped Brenda's wrist with a violent shove, sending her stumbling backward into Thomas. She clutched her arm, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The aristocratic mask had completely melted away, leaving behind a pale, terrified woman whose darkest secret was about to be aired out in the freezing street. "Tell them, Brenda!" DeAndre barked, his voice raw and echoing off the brick facade of the apartment building. He turned his wild eyes toward Thomas, who was busy trying to steady his trembling wife. "You want to know where the money went, Thomas? You want to know how I managed to pledge a property I did not even own to a syndicate of violent underground lenders? Ask the matriarch of this perfect family." Thomas looked from his son-in-law to his wife. His thick gray eyebrows drew together in deep confusion. "Brenda, what on earth is he talking about?" Brenda shook her head frantically. "He is lying. He is a degenerate gambler trying to shift the blame to save his own skin. Do not listen to a word he says. I lost the seed money at the blackjack tables a year ago," DeAndre confessed loudly, stepping away from the U-Haul truck and gesturing aggressively toward Brenda. "I was bleeding cash. The banks cut me off. The credit cards were maxed out. I was desperate. And your lovely wife found out about my debts last October when she intercepted a final notice collection letter delivered to our house." Brittany let out a sharp gasp, clutching her pregnant stomach as she stared at her husband. "You knew for a year. Mom knew for a year." "Oh, she knew." DeAndre laughed, a harsh, scraping sound devoid of any actual humor. "I thought she was going to expose me to Thomas. I thought my life was over. But Brenda did not care about the lies, Brittany. She did not care that our startup was completely bankrupt. Brenda only cared about leverage. She saw an opportunity." DeAndre took a menacing step closer to his mother-in-law. Brenda practically shrank into Thomas's heavy wool coat. "She told me she would keep my little gambling secret," DeAndre sneered, projecting his voice so the four silent men blocking the truck could hear every single word. "She said she would help me secure a massive hard money loan to cover my tracks. But she had a price. Do you want to tell them your price, Brenda, or should I?" Brenda squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to speak. $50,000! DeAndre shouted, the number ringing out like a gunshot in the frigid air. She demanded a $50,000 cut of the mob money right off the top. She wanted cash because Thomas had cut up her credit cards after her last shopping spree. She wanted to buy that custom-ordered, fully loaded luxury SUV she had been crying about for 6 months. She needed to impress the women at the country club, and she was willing to sell out her own daughter to get the keys. The revelation landed with the destructive force of a bomb. Brittany stumbled backward, her pristine white coat brushing against the icy brick wall. She stared at her mother, her eyes wide with total, uncomprehending horror. "You knew these men were dangerous," Brittany choked out, her voice trembling violently. "You knew DeAndre was borrowing money from criminals and you helped him forge documents to steal Cassidy's home. For a car, you put my babies in danger for a car." "I did it for this family," Brenda screamed, her voice cracking as she finally broke her silence. She looked frantically from Brittany to Thomas, desperately trying to construct a defense. Cassidy did not deserve that condo. She is selfish and ungrateful. DeAndre needed the capital to save your lifestyle, Brittany. I was simply securing what was rightfully ours. The car was just a small compensation for my trouble. Thomas physically shoved Brenda away from him. The movement was so abrupt and filled with such pure disgust that Brenda nearly lost her footing on the ice. The proud, untouchable patriarch of the family looked at his wife as if she were a rotting corpse. You conspired with this degenerate to steal property, commit wire fraud, and entangle my name, my reputation, and my pregnant daughter with organized crime for a luxury vehicle. Thomas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly whisper. Thomas, please, Brenda begged, reaching out a trembling, manicured hand toward his coat. He slapped her hand away. Do not touch me. You sicken me. You have destroyed everything. The illusion of the flawless high society family had permanently shattered. It lay in a million jagged pieces on the freezing asphalt. Brenda was exposed as a greedy, backstabbing criminal. DeAndre was a desperate, broke gambling addict. Thomas was a ruined man whose legacy had just been incinerated. And Brittany was finally realizing that her entire life was built on a mountain of toxic, dangerous lies. All the while, the four massive collectors in dark wool coats stood completely still, watching the dramatic implosion with cold, detached patience. They did not care about family betrayals or forged signatures. They only cared about the $150,000 owed to their boss, and they were not leaving this parking lot without it. I sat perfectly still on my balcony in Italy, holding my phone steady. I had watched the entire spectacular collapse play out on my screen. The sheer satisfaction of watching them devour each other was intoxicating. I did not feel an ounce of pity. They had orchestrated their own demise. I simply stepped out of the way and let gravity do the rest. I unmuted my microphone. The crisp, clear audio of my voice cut right through the sound of Brenda's pathetic sobbing and Brittany's hysterical shrieking. Well, I said cheerfully, making sure my tone was bright, breezy, and entirely devoid of sympathy. Four heads immediately snapped down to stare at the phone screen, clutched in DeAndre's shaking hand. Since Mom was an accomplice to wire fraud and forgery, I continued offering them a dazzling camera-ready smile. I guess you will be sharing a prison cell, but that is only if the loan sharks do not get to you first. The silence over the FaceTime connection lasted only a fraction of a second before Thomas reacted. He could not process the shame of his wife's betrayal, so he defaulted to his primary instinct. He lunged forward, ripping the phone out of DeAndre's trembling hands. The camera view spun wildly, capturing a blur of concrete and gray sky before settling on Thomas's flushed, furious face. He held the device close, his jaw set in the rigid authoritarian lines that had dictated my entire childhood. He did not ask for help. He demanded it. His voice boomed across the parking lot, echoing off the brick buildings, commanding me to fix the disaster I had supposedly created. He ordered me to wire the $480,000 from the condo sale directly into his checking account this very second. He framed it not as a request, but as my absolute duty as his daughter. He yelled that violent men were standing just feet away from his pregnant daughter and his wife, and that I was going to be personally responsible for their deaths if I did not instantly obey his command. He used his heavy, imposing, fatherly voice, the exact tone that used to make me freeze, apologize, and surrender everything I had, just to appease his temper. I did not freeze. I did not apologize. I leaned closer to the camera, resting my chin on my hand, completely unbothered by his booming voice. I looked right through the digital screen, ensuring he could see the total absence of fear in my eyes. I told him no. Thomas stopped mid-breath, his eyes bulging as if I had spoken a foreign language. He sputtered, demanding to know how I could be so selfish, how I could abandon my own blood when their lives were literally on the line. I kept my voice deadly calm, stripping away every ounce of emotion. I told him that for 33 years I had served as this family's designated punching bag. I reminded him of the college fund I had spent my entire adolescence working to build, the exact same fund he secretly drained to finance Brittany's lavish European gap year because she deserved to find herself. I reminded him of the countless family dinners where they relentlessly belittled my career, calling my real estate investments and tech ventures a cute little hobby. I reminded him that they had despised me, used me, and discarded me right up until the exact moment they conspired to forge my signature and steal my home, all to fund his golden child and her criminal gambling-addicted husband. I looked into his enraged eyes and stated with absolute unwavering conviction that I owed them absolutely nothing. The rejection hit Thomas like a physical blow, but his shock instantly mutated into a towering destructive rage. If he could not control me through guilt, he would resort to intimidation. He began screaming into the phone spit, flying from his lips onto the camera lens. He threatened to call the Seattle Police Department this very second. He roared that he was going to have me arrested for grand larceny, extradited from Italy, and thrown into a federal penitentiary for real estate fraud. He promised to hire the most vicious litigators in the state, reverse the sale of the condo, and tie me up in court until I was bankrupt and begging for his mercy on my hands and knees. I let him scream. I let him expend all his aggressive energy, while the four men in dark coats stood silently in the background, completely unimpressed by his tantrum. When Thomas finally paused to take a ragged breath, I tapped a single button on my laptop keyboard. I merged a waiting caller into the active FaceTime session. The screen instantly split. On the left side, the chaotic, freezing parking lot featuring my red-faced father. On the bottom right, my sunny Mediterranean terrace. And on the top right, sitting in a pristine glass-walled office high above Manhattan, was Gavin, my corporate attorney. Gavin adjusted his expensive wire-rimmed glasses and offered Thomas a polite, devastatingly professional smile. Thomas stared at the split screen, temporarily derailed by the sudden appearance of a man in a bespoke suit. I introduced Gavin, explaining that he had overseen the entire corporate acquisition of my property. I then invited Gavin to address my father's legal concerns. Gavin did not waste a single breath on pleasantries. He systematically and clinically dismantled Thomas's entire reality. In a calm, measured tone, Gavin informed my father that the sale of the property was 100% legally binding. I was the sole legal owner, the title was perfectly clear, and the cash transaction had already been fully processed and approved by the county recorder. There was no fraud on my part, no larceny, and absolutely zero legal recourse for Thomas to pursue. My hands were entirely clean. Then Gavin leaned slightly forward toward his webcam, his voice dropping into a register of sharp surgical precision. He explained that while my transaction was bulletproof, DeAndre and Brenda were facing a catastrophic legal nightmare. By forging my signature on a quitclaim deed to secure a $150,000 hard money loan across state lines, they had crossed into federal jurisdiction. They had committed aggravated identity theft and federal wire fraud. Gavin laid out the penal code with brutal, unforgiving efficiency. He informed a suddenly mute Thomas that these specific federal crimes carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in a federal penitentiary. It was not a suggestion. It was not a worst-case scenario. It was a statutory guarantee. The entire family stared at Gavin's calm, smiling face on the split screen. The bluster completely drained out of Thomas. His shoulders sagged and his knees physically buckled under the crushing weight of the law. He looked at Brenda, who had slid down the side of the moving truck to sit on the icy pavement, her luxury aspirations dissolving into the cold, hard reality of a federal indictment. Brittany buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched the total devastation wash over them. I offered a bright, cheerful smile to the camera. Since Mom was an active accomplice to wire fraud and forgery, I said lightly, I guess you and DeAndre will be sharing a federal prison cell. I took another slow sip of my wine, savoring the crisp flavor, as the four men in the parking lot finally took a step toward DeAndre. But that is only if those loan sharks do not get to you first. The heavy silence that followed my words was broken only by the crunch of heavy boots on the ice. One of the loan sharks took a single deliberate step toward DeAndre. The movement was slight, but it carried the weight of an executioner stepping up to the block. That single step snapped Brenda out of her paralyzed shock. The reality of a federal prison cell and the immediate physical threat of organized crime did not humble my mother. It made her go completely feral. She scrambled up from the filthy asphalt, her expensive wool coat stained with dirty slush. She lunged toward DeAndre, but not to attack him. She snatched the phone from his trembling hands, bringing her flushed, tear-streaked face mere inches from the camera lens. She looked absolutely deranged. Her perfectly styled hair was plastered to her sweaty forehead, and her eyes were wide with a rabid, cornered animal fury. She screamed that I was a vindictive, jealous monster. She roared that she would never spend a single second inside a courtroom, let alone a prison cell. She promised to hire the most ruthless, bloodthirsty defense attorneys in the state of Washington. She threatened to bury me under a mountain of frivolous countersuits, claiming I was the one who orchestrated the fraud. She swore she would tie up my assets, freeze my bank accounts, and drag my name through the mud until I was begging her for mercy. "I will liquidate every single penny of our Vanguard retirement fund," Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the brick apartment building. "Thomas and I have over $2 million sitting in that account. I will drain it completely dry to destroy you. I will spend every last dime ensuring you lose that precious Italian villa and end up living on the streets." I did not blink. I let her catch her breath, watching the mist of her frantic panting cloud the cold air in the parking lot. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the wrought iron table, the bright Mediterranean sun warming my shoulders. I picked up my wineglass by the stem and took a slow, deliberate sip. "You always loved dismissing my career, Brenda," I said, my voice completely devoid of the fear she so desperately wanted to provoke. "You spent the last decade telling your country club friends that I worked some dead-end tech support job. You never actually bothered to understand what a data privacy analyst does." Brenda bared her teeth, preparing to launch into another hysterical tirade about how my career was irrelevant compared to her impending legal assault. I cut her off smoothly. My entire professional existence revolves around tracking digital footprints. I audit encrypted transactions, trace offshore wire transfers, and untangle complex financial webs. I see where money originates, and more importantly, I see exactly where it goes. I know every single password, security question, and account routing number you and Thomas possess because you made me set up your home network 5 years ago. Thomas suddenly lifted his head, his eyes darting toward the phone screen. A new, much deeper layer of dread washed over his face. "That is a great threat, Mom," I said, offering a tight, unyielding smile. "A $2 million legal war chest sounds terrifying, but before you start writing checks to high-powered defense attorneys, you might want to log into your Vanguard retirement account right now." "You are bluffing," Brenda spat, though her voice wavered slightly. "You cannot legally touch those accounts." "I did not touch them," I corrected calmly. "I just watched the data flow. Pull up the app, Brenda. Look at your balance." Brenda sneered at the screen, refusing to show a single ounce of submission. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Her eyes darted frantically toward Thomas, who was staring at DeAndre with an expression of dawning absolute terror. DeAndre had backed himself flush against the side of the moving truck, his hands raised defensively, his face the color of wet chalk. With trembling fingers, Brenda swiped up on her phone screen. She minimized the FaceTime call, keeping my audio live, and frantically tapped the Vanguard icon on her home screen. The facial recognition scanner verified her identity. A small animated loading circle spun in the center of the screen for 2 agonizing seconds. The live video feed from her front-facing camera captured her exact reaction. The aggressive, arrogant sneer instantly vanished. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her skin a sickly ashen gray. Her jaw went slack. Her eyes widened so far they looked like they might physically pop out of her skull. She stopped breathing. She looked like a woman who had just watched her own executioner flip the switch. "Brenda!" Thomas demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "Brenda, what does it say?" She could not speak. Her throat worked convulsively, but no sound emerged. Her hands began to shake with such sudden, violent tremors that she could no longer grip the device. The phone slipped from her fingers, tumbling through the freezing air and shattered against the icy pavement. The screen spiderwebbed into 1,000 jagged pieces, but the video feed held strong broadcasting from the ground, looking up at their devastated faces. DeAndre had not just forged a signature to steal my house. The hard money loan was only his final desperate play. Weeks ago, while Brenda was busy helping him plot my eviction, her perfect son-in-law had gained access to their master passwords. He had systematically liquidated their entire retirement portfolio, draining every single dime of their life savings to pay off the astronomical compounding interest he owed the loan sharks just to keep them from breaking his legs. They had absolutely nothing left. The cracked screen of Brenda's phone offered a distorted, spider-webbed view of the parking lot from the ground up. The microphone picked up the ragged, wheezing sound of Thomas struggling to pull freezing oxygen into his lungs. The absolute realization that his entire $2 million Vanguard retirement fund was gone hit his nervous system like a freight train. He staggered forward, his hands flying up to clutch the heavy wool of his coat directly over his heart. He let out a strangled, agonizing sound that was completely devoid of his usual commanding authority. The proud, untouchable patriarch dropped heavily to his knees on the icy asphalt. He bowed his head, his chest heaving, as the reality of total financial ruin crushed the breath right out of him. Brenda was completely mute. She knelt in the dirty slush beside Thomas, her hands hovering uselessly over his shaking shoulders. Her mouth opened and closed as she stared at the empty space where her wealthy future used to be. The country club memberships, the luxury vacations, the desperate need to maintain appearances had all culminated in this single devastating moment on a grimy loading dock. Brittany was a crumpled heap of white winter fabric on the ground a few feet away. She beat her fists against the frozen pavement, sobbing with such absolute unrestrained hysteria that her cries echoed loudly off the surrounding brick walls. Her carefully curated life was entirely gone. The designer nursery was a lie. Her wealthy husband was a thief. The perfect family illusion she broadcasted daily to her followers had shattered into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces right there on the sidewalk. DeAndre did not look at his weeping wife. He did not look at his gasping father-in-law. His eyes darted wildly around the parking lot. He was a rat trapped in a maze, and his survival instinct finally overrode his paralyzing fear. He began inching backward, sliding his shoulders along the corrugated orange metal of the moving truck, desperately trying to put distance between himself and the 4 silent collectors, forming a tight semicircle around him. He thought he saw a gap. He thought he saw a narrow alleyway leading out toward the main street. Before DeAndre could pivot and run, the deafening screech of heavy tires tearing across the frosty pavement shattered the winter air. 2 massive, unmarked black SUVs careened around the corner of the apartment building with terrifying speed. They slammed on their brakes, fishtailing slightly on the ice before coming to a violent, aggressive halt directly across the loading dock exit. They effectively boxed in the U-Haul, completely sealing off the only remaining escape route. The doors of the new vehicles swung open simultaneously. 6 more men stepped out into the freezing wind. These men did not wear the standard-issue wool coats of the collectors. They moved with the casual, terrifying authority of people who owned the entire street. One of them, a tall man with a jagged scar running along his jawline, held a tablet in his hand. A glowing red dot on the screen pulsed in perfect synchronization with DeAndre's current location. They had pinged his mobile device. The loan sharks had tracked him directly to the source. DeAndre let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. He abandoned all logic and bolted. He scrambled blindly toward the narrow gap between the U-Haul and the brick wall, his expensive winter boots slipping wildly on the black ice. He did not make it 3 steps. 2 of the massive men lunged forward with terrifying speed. They hit DeAndre, simultaneously slamming him face first into the icy pavement with a sickening, heavy impact. They hauled him up by the collar of his ruined designer coat, his feet dangling uselessly above the ground as he gasped for air. The tall man with the scarred jaw walked slowly across the parking lot. He completely ignored Thomas's gasping, Brittany's screaming, and Brenda's catatonic stare. He walked with total unbothered purpose. He stopped directly over Brenda's shattered phone. A heavy black combat boot filled my laptop screen for a fraction of a second before the man leaned down and scooped the device up from the ice. He brought the phone up to his face. His cold, dead eyes stared directly into the cracked front-facing camera, meeting my gaze across the digital connection. He did not say a single word. He simply raised one thick finger, tapped the red end call button, and plunged my screen into total, absolute darkness. The sudden violent termination of the FaceTime call remained burned into my memory for days, but the cold dread of Seattle was now entirely gone. 3 months had passed since that digital screen went black on the freezing asphalt of the U-Haul parking lot. Now the only sound filling my ears was the rhythmic crashing of the Tyrrhenian Sea against the rocky Amalfi coast. I sat at a small wrought iron table outside a bustling, sun-drenched cafe. The air smelled heavily of roasted espresso, sea salt, and fresh lemon. I took a slow sip of my cappuccino, letting the warm Mediterranean breeze wash over my face. I was thousands of miles away from the rain, the manipulation, and the suffocating weight of the family I had finally left behind. My new life was a masterpiece of my own design. The massive payout from the condo sale had been securely reinvested into a diversified offshore portfolio, yielding returns that afforded me a comfortable, quiet existence in Italy. I spent my mornings consulting remotely for European tech firms, my afternoons exploring ancient cobblestone streets, and my evenings completely undisturbed by screaming matches or financial demands. I opened my silver laptop intending to finalize a data privacy audit for a client in Milan, when a notification chimed in the upper right corner of the screen. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a routine calendar update. But the sender address caught my eye and made my hand freeze over the trackpad. It was an email forwarded to an obscure secondary account I had used nearly a decade ago to set up my parents' home Wi-Fi network. The name attached to the incoming message was Brittany. She had somehow managed to track down this single forgotten digital thread. I hovered my cursor over the bold text. Part of me considered deleting it unread permanently, erasing her from my orbit without a second thought. But the data analyst in me demanded total closure. I clicked open the message. The email was a sprawling, chaotic block of text, completely devoid of grammar, punctuation, or pride. Brittany bypassed any polite greetings and launched directly into a frantic, desperate plea. She wrote that everything had fallen apart the exact second that FaceTime call ended. The loan sharks had not killed DeAndre, but they had severely brutalized him right there in the snow before dragging him directly to the local authorities to cut an immunity deal for themselves. He was currently sitting in a federal penitentiary serving a mandatory minimum sentence for interstate wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. Brittany detailed how he had traded his tailored designer suits for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. She had immediately filed for divorce, desperately trying to distance herself from his criminal record, but the damage to her pristine social image was already irreversible. The fallout for my parents was absolute and unforgiving. Thomas and Brenda had lost the suburban McMansion they had valued above their own daughter. Without their Vanguard retirement funds, they instantly defaulted on their multiple mortgages. They were drowning in astronomical legal fees, paying high-priced defense attorneys just to keep Brenda out of federal prison for her role in witnessing the forged quitclaim deed. They were entirely bankrupt. Brittany explained that the bank had formally foreclosed on their property, forcing my proud, arrogant parents to move into a tiny, damp rental apartment on the industrial outskirts of Tacoma. Thomas, the man who used to scream at me for not being ambitious enough, was now working as a minimum wage greeter at a local hardware store just to afford basic groceries. His towering pride was completely broken. Brenda rarely left their cramped living room, utterly humiliated by her rapid fall from country club grace. The final paragraph was a masterclass in toxic manipulation. Brittany completely ignored her own complicity in trying to steal my home. She glossed over the forgery, the deceit, and the sheer greed. Instead, she weaponized her children. She begged for a wire transfer. She pleaded that her kids needed new winter clothes, that Thomas's health was failing under the stress of manual labor, and that Brenda was severely depressed in their new squalid living conditions. She typed that despite everything that had happened, we were still blood. She wrote that family is supposed to be there for each other during the hard times, and that she knew I would not let my own nieces and nephews starve just to prove a point. She demanded that I step up and fulfill my duty as her sister. I read the entire email twice. I waited for the familiar pang of anxiety to strike my chest. I waited for the childhood conditioning to kick in, urging me to open my bank account, apologize for my success, and fix their self-inflicted disasters. I felt absolutely nothing, no anger, no sorrow, no obligation. I experienced only a cold, clinical detachment. They had gleefully dug their own graves, conspired to throw me inside, and now they were begging me to pull them out of the dirt. I placed my coffee cup down on the ceramic saucer. I placed my fingers on the keyboard and hit reply. I did not waste time addressing her pathetic excuses. I did not justify my boundaries, explain my wealth, or defend my peace. I typed 2 crisp, definitive sentences. Family protects each other. You tried to feed me to the wolves for your own comfort. I paused, remembering the pristine white walls of the home they had tried to steal from me, and the damp, miserable reality they had created for themselves. I added one final line. Enjoy the basement. I clicked send. I watched the blue progress bar shoot across the bottom of the screen, delivering my final verdict across the globe. Then I accessed the account settings. I navigated to the security tab, clicked delete account, and confirmed the permanent erasure of the email address. The digital thread was completely severed. There would be no follow-up messages, no more desperate pleas, no future avenues for them to infiltrate my life. They were ghosts, locked away in a past I had officially buried. I snapped the laptop shut. The sharp click echoed with total finality. I slid the computer into my leather tote bag and stood up from the iron chair. I left a few euros on the table for the barista and turned my back on the cafe. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Amalfi coast, casting a brilliant golden glow across the sparkling water. A warm breeze swept up from the shoreline, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. I walked out into the bright Mediterranean sun, my steps incredibly light, my mind perfectly clear, and my future entirely my own. I was finally completely free. The most profound lesson from this story is that true security and value can never be derived from those who exploit you, even if they are family. For years, the protagonist endured manipulation and belittlement, conditioned to believe her worth was tied to their conditional approval. However, by establishing absolute financial and emotional independence, she completely shattered their control. She learned that enforcing unyielding boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary measure of protection. Shared blood does not excuse abuse or entitle anyone to claim your ultimate success. Share your experiences with setting boundaries and comment below.